Welcome to episode 110 of the Scholar Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Breitman, coming to you Thursday, July 13th. Wanted today's podcast to focus on the reported Rutgers men's basketball schedule for the 2023-2024 season. Has not officially come out from the program yet. Strong indications that the 11-game non-conference slate that's been reported is going to be exactly what it's going to be. Couple games still in the contract phase, but I got assurances that this is looking like what the schedule is going to be, barring any last minute hiccups. So wanted to kind of run through it and also compare to previous years, discuss the impact just in terms of, the NCAA tournament selection committee, talking about quads, KenPom, all that. So let's jump in. Just talking about the reported schedule for now. Obviously, some dates have been reported, others not. But I just kind of wanted to not focus on dates right now, but really focus on opponents, level opponents, strength of schedule, all that. So the first thing that sticks out to me, which going back, I looked at the entire history of the non-conference schedule under Steve Pikiell, now entering year 8. The 2020-2021 season is a bit of an asterisk because there was only 4 non-conference games due to COVID. Also, the first 2 years, note that there was 13 games in 2016-17 and 2017-18 because the Big Ten schedule was only 18 games. It then went to 20 games, and now it's either 10 or 11 non-conference games. So harping on first the last 3 years, the biggest thing that stands out to me, so there were 10 games in 21-22, 11 games the last year, and then this proposed schedule coming up. Rutgers has 4 high major opponents on the schedule, and going back through the entire history of Steve Pikiell, they've never had 4 high majors in the non-conference on the schedule. So that right there is a obvious improvement in terms of the schedule. Now, where Rutgers kind of got, screwed a little bit out of their control was the GAVA games, right? They got Georgetown, which actually on this reported schedule would have this only the 7th best KenPom ranking from last year. So if they had gotten, Providence, even a Villanova, who had a down year last year, that would have been, a top 100 opponent in KenPom, a quad 1 or 2 opponent, most likely in net. So I really focused my research on KenPom, because I think KenPom is a better measure of how good a team actually is. Also, KenPom is very reflective in terms of how the teams will be weighed going into next season. Quads can change, net ranking can change. Some of this is going to be pretty easy to predict in terms of what the quad might be, but there's going to be fluctuations. But I think year over year, looking at KenPom, also net didn't even exist the whole Pikiell tenure. It's only been the last 3-4 years. So I do focus on KenPom in this regard. Georgetown had a 219 KenPom ranking last year. That would qualify right now for a Q4 home game. Now, I do think with Ed Cooley year 1, Georgetown, is not going to be one of the top teams in the Big East, but they're going to be better. They're definitely going to be better. I think their KenPom, they could end up being, 219 from last year. They could end up being, low 100s, maybe even break top 100. How would that work for quad? Well, quads are, in terms of this being a home game, for it to be a quad 2 home game, they'd have to be in the top 51 to 100. So is that possible? It could end up by the end of the season. Georgetown, listen, Ed Cooley, for what you want to say about him, he's a very good coach. Could end up being a quad 3, could end up being a quad 2. But just in terms of looking at the strength of schedule from last year versus this year, looking at last year's finishing KenPom rankings, they got a bad break with Georgetown. But their top 3 opponents, you have Mississippi State, which is going to be a neutral game at the Rock on December 23rd. Seton Hall, both those teams. So Mississippi State was 53. That's going to be on a neutral court. Seton Hall was 58. That's going to be on the road. Both teams could be about the same, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse, but those are their best 2 in terms of highest rated KenPom teams from last year. Then you have Wake, road trip, number 86 last year, and then Princeton, which is not a high major, but finished KenPom number 91 last year. So 4 top 100 teams in KenPom from last year. Looking back at the entire Pikiell era, they've never played 4 top 100 KenPom teams from the previous year. The most they've ever played is 3, which was last year and 2019. They've never played 4 high majors before in the non-conference. Check. Then the other key aspect to this proposed schedule is they have 4 road/neutral contests. Happen to be all against their 4 highest ranked opponents from last year. So the quad potential there is really good. For a neutral game to be a quad 1 game, your opponent has to be in the top 75. There's a very good chance Mississippi State will be in that top 75. So that's going to be most likely a quad 1 game. The other neutral game, Princeton, probably not top 75, probably fall in the 76 to 135. So that's looking at a quad 2 game. Then you have Seton Hall. For it to be a road quad 1 game, you have to be in the top 50. Seton Hall could be in the top 50. It might not be, but that's looking at like a quad 1, quad 2 game. And then you have Wake, which was 86 last year. For it to be a quad 1, 1 through 50, quad 2, 51 through 100. So you're looking at any combination of those 4 games being quad 1 and quad 2. That's a big positive. So you have the 4 road neutral. And in addition to, in terms of how the net and the committee looks at non-conference strength of schedule, having 4 road neutral games out of the 11 is really going to help. The other thing that sticks out is the bottom. So last year, bottom 300 in terms of KenPom, Rutgers had 5 out of 11 games against the bottom 300, 300 or worse. 2021-22, they had 6. This proposed schedule for next season, 3. They do have LIU, which is the worst ranked KenPom team from last year. Stonehill 331, St. Peter's 308. But after that, the bottom looks a lot better. So the top's looking better and the bottom's looking better. If you look at this chart and how I've and I'm going to put it in the post of the article, a lot of the information, it looks very methodical to me in terms of how the schedule was constructed, in terms of how are we going to improve. I wouldn't even say incrementally, but listen, it's not dramatically better. It's not going to be a top 100 non-conference schedule, but it's better. It's more competitive. In terms of top 250. So let me skip ahead. In terms of the bottom 300, right? There were 4 of the past 7 years. They played at least 4 or 5 bottom 300 teams. And if you don't count 21, it's really just 2 years. They just played 1 in 2019, which was 10 games, and 2019, 2020. So in terms of the bottom, it's much better. In terms of top 50, Rutgers has 7 teams from last year ranked in the top 250 of KenPom. Last year was 6. The year before that was 5. The most ever was 2019-2020. They had 8. Then you're looking at average KenPom ranking. So this is I'm going to start at 2016-2017, Steve Pikiell's first year. Average KenPom ranking in 12 opponents, 232, plus a non-ranked team that was Division II or Division III. 2017-2018, 13 non-conference games. Average KenPom ranking, 243, plus a non-ranked team, Division II, Division III. 2018-2019, average KenPom ranking, 189. That's the best. The next year, 2019-2020, was 182, but that didn't count one additional opponent that was non-ranked Division II, Division III. And then you have the last 3 years, so 2021-2022. We're looking specifically at how Rutgers has improved. 2021-2022, the year they barely made the NCAA tournament. They had some bad losses, which I want to talk about in a minute. But their average KenPom for the non-conference was 238. Last year, 207. This year, based on the reported 11-game schedule, it's projecting at 200. Again, I think 3 teams, in terms of their Ken Pom ranking, could make sizable jumps. Georgetown at 219, I think they could be a lot better. Bryant at 208, I think they could be challenged for their conference championship. I think they could be in the ones. And then Wake at 86, I think Wake could be better too. I think Mississippi State and Seton Hall could possibly be better. I think they'll probably be around what they were in the 50s. If they're worse, I don't think it's going to be by much. Princeton, everybody says, oh, it's going to be a down year. They lost a lot. Yes, they lost 2 of their best players, but they have 6 of their 9 rotational contributors from last season back. I don't think they're going to, drop off the face of the earth. I think they'll be a, top 150 Ken Pom team. They're at 91 from last year, so that could be a drop. But at neutral, it's probably going to be a quad 2 or quad 3 game. If they finish in the top 135 in net, it's a quad 2, and I think there's a legit chance that will happen. So, just harping on some key factors in the schedule. High majors, the most of the Steve Pikiell era, 4. Road neutral games in the non-conference, 4. Most of the Steve Pikiell era. Bottom, Ken Pom, worse than 300, 3. Second best ever. Top 250, second best ever, 7. And in terms of top 100, 4, the most. So, improvement. Definitely improvement. Again, I don't know if it's as much as certain fans wanted, but I think also this ties into a point I wanted to make in terms of the last 2 seasons. Rutgers had bad losses. And as much as people want to say the committee beat them up for a poor non-conference last year, they had some bad losses. And 2 of the worst losses were Big Ten losses. Minnesota on the road, catastrophic loss. Nebraska at home, which I like Nebraska. I think they were a much different team in February. From a basketball perspective, I didn't think it was, a bad loss. I think Nebraska was playing really well at times. But from a metric standpoint, it was a bad loss. In terms of who else they lost to in the non-conference, Temple was a bad loss. They were 120 last year. It was a neutral court, but that was a bad loss. Seton Hall, did finish 58, but from a quad perspective, they were quad 3. So it was Temple, Seton Hall, Minnesota, and Nebraska were all quad 3 losses. So that killed them. 2 of those were conference games. So the year before, infamously, I guess I should say, they lost those 3 back-to-back games: Lafayette, DePaul, UMass. One was on the road, one was neutral, one was home. The Lafayette game was a quad 4 loss. The strength of schedule was way worse, but they made the tournament. And why did they make the tournament? Because they had 5 really high Q1 wins. The Purdue game, and then that 4-game winning streak with all ranked opponents. Rutgers had really, really high quality wins that did ultimately negate those bad non-conference losses. Last year, the biggest reason they didn't make the NCAA tournament, aside from, play on the court, losing mag, all that stuff, from a metric standpoint, they did not have the same level of high-quality wins that they had the year before to make up for those 4 quad 3 losses. That was the biggest difference. The moral of the story is no matter how hard or weak your non-conference is you have to win the games you should on paper. And if Rutgers could just take that step, it would be a huge step forward. And I do think that when you lose games you should win on paper, that's when the committee can hang you. But as we saw 2 years ago, they should have been hung, but they had those high-quality conference wins. Obviously, you have to have, double-digit conference wins, but it's also who you beat in conference that can make up for those losses. I mentioned Providence before. Providence didn't have a very good non-conference schedule. They didn't have any quality non-conference wins, but they had huge Big Ten, Big East wins. They beat UConn. They beat Creighton. There's one more big win that they had. I think they beat Marquette. Those were all, like, metrics-wise, top 20, top 25, net and KenPom wins. So that got them in. Rutgers didn't have that, and that was the biggest reason, I think. So the schedule's better. You got to win the games you're supposed to win. And then you have your top 4 games are road and neutral, right? So road neutral games matter, and it's going to impact your non-conference. So, beating Princeton on a neutral court is really important. Obviously, I would say, obviously you want them to win every game, right? But if they could split the road games, and if they can go 3-1 in those road neutral and win all the other games on paper, I mean, maybe I'm asking for too much. I don't know, but obviously that would be huge. And that's more, whatever their strength of schedule ends up being in non-conference, you're winning all those games. You're winning the road neutral games. That's they're putting themselves in position in conference play to make the NCAA tournament. You have to avoid the landmines. And to me, the biggest issue with having a poor non-conference strength of schedule is your margin for error. When you have a poor non-conference schedule, your margin for error is much thinner. So they have created a little bit of cushion here, right? Where, you can't go 0-4 in your top 4 games, but let's just say they split the top 4 games and they win every other game on paper. They're going to be fine going into Big Ten. They'll be fine. You got to win 10, 11 games in Big Ten. Sure, you got to do that every year to make the NCAA tournament. You just have to get through non-conference without any landmines. And that's the goal this year. They have not done that the last 2 years. And that is a huge, huge factor here. The other point I wanted to make about non-conference that gets lost, I think, is preparation, styles, right? The Big Ten, we know, is a very physical, slow tempo style. And that's a big reason why a lot of the Big Ten teams struggle in NCAA tournament. What I like about this, Mississippi State certainly fits that bill in terms of a Big Ten style. It's going to be a really low scoring game. 2 of the better defensive programs in the country year after year. Princeton plays a much different style. That's going to test them and help prepare them. Wake plays a little bit more loose, up and down. That's going to help them. Seton Hall, more like a Big Ten style as well. Bryant plays a little more up and down. I think Georgetown will as well with Ed Cooley. So I'm not going to be able to speak about the styles of all these teams. I will say Howard. Howard is a good addition. They're at 218. They're actually the 6th highest KenPom ranked team from last year on the schedule. They won the MEAC. So that's a really quality ad. So I've said before, it's not just about the top 100, the high majors. It's those mid-major, low-major, improving the quality there. And we're seeing it. Again, just 3 sub-300 teams. That's a huge improvement. So adding a Howard, right, at 218 instead of Central Connecticut State at 349 is a major addition. It's not going to get the headlines. People aren't going to talk about it. But that to me, that when I look at it on paper, okay, that's a noticeable difference. Even BU, round 2, they were 266. They've been a team that they've been, in the neighborhood of 200, even a little bit under at times. That's a team that could be better. I think St. Peter's, Stonehill, and LAU probably, not could be very good. But that's three cupcakes as opposed to 5, 6, 7. Quads, yes, you could still have 6 quad 4 games on this based on this schedule, but you could end up having 5 quad 1, quad 2 games, which would be a major upgrade. So it's going to be a better schedule. The matter now is getting the team ready for that schedule. Going overseas in August is huge. Finishing out this roster, waiting on some news there. Things are looking good with Austin Williams. Potentially, I think they have to add another portal guy. But in terms of the schedule, again, final takeaways here. 4 top 100 KenPom teams based on last year will be the most ever. 4 high majors, most ever in regard to the Pikiell era. 3 sub 300 or worse, second best. 7 top 250 KenPom teams, second best. And just having 4 road neutral games is the most. So noticeable improvement. I think it's a logical jump. It makes sense. You don't want to go from, 30 to 60 in terms of speed limit. Like, you can't make it a top 100 schedule. And thank God they didn't, with losing who they've lost. It will be very interesting to see what happens the following year. The 2024 class comes in. If Dylan Harper comes in, that will be fascinating. We'll have lots of discussion there. But overall, initial takeaways, an upgrade, probably will be the best non-conference schedule of the Pikiell era. Message received, and I think it's going to be a very entertaining non-conference slate, and I think it's also going to prepare them better than in years past. It's going to be more competitive. They're going to play different styles. It's going to help them. It's going to help them. They have to avoid the landmines, get into Big Ten play intact without any bad losses. And then, again, you got to take care of the bad losses in the Big Ten as well. Minnesota, Penn State's probably not going to be too good. Those will probably be the 2 worst teams just in terms of KenPom and quads and everything. You got to beat those teams. You got to win those games. Thank you for listening and watching once again here at The Scarlet Faithful.